All right. Hello to everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Kevin Murphy with the Office of Water Programs here at Sacramento State, and we're happy you are attending the second of two fall 2025 Water Seminar Series presentations. As most of you know, we are a training and research organization with a focus on water quality and water resources, and we annually host two fall presentations and two spring presentations. So following suit, we'll have two more presentations this spring, so stay tuned on that. I also want to point out that all the presentations we host are recorded and can be accessed via the Office of Water Programs website. Okay, so today's presentation will be approximately 40 minutes long, and we should have about 20 minutes left for questions at the end. We can go a little beyond 1 p.m. to answer questions if necessary. Please submit questions by emailing them to the email address currently showing on the screen. That's seminarquestions@owp.csus.edu. You can take a screenshot now or also check the chat line where the email address is also provided. Okay, now for the important part, I want to welcome Shauna Atherton Bauer. Shauna is going to talk about the California Department of Conservation's programs, about how their programs contribute to advancing the state's groundwater sustainability goals. Shauna is the director for the Division of Land Resource Protection at the California Department of Conservation. She oversees the state's agricultural land conservation programs, as well as programs that support regional efforts to meet the state's natural and working lands goals. Shauna led the development of the state's Multi-benefit Land Repurposing Program, which is designed to support the strategic repurposing of agricultural lands likely to come out of production as a result of the state's groundwater sustainability efforts. She also helped launch the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program and has over 10 years of professional experience in the environmental planning and sustainable agriculture and land conservation fields. So with that, I will hand it off to Shauna.
Well, when you put it that way, thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate being here today. I will start by apologizing. I have a little bit of a cold that's come on, so if I need to pause and drink water, I hope you will forgive me for that. And let me make sure I have my notes. Okay, we're good to go. Oh, and it would help if I was sharing. All right. Are we good to go?
We're good.
Perfect. All right. So thank you everyone for coming today. Just some a quick agenda for what I'll be covering today. I'm going to do some context setting, both for the division that I work within and the programs that we work on. And our approach to those. We'll spend most of our time talking about how our one particular program, the Multi-benefit Land Repurposing Program, contributes to the state's groundwater sustainability efforts. We'll provide some project examples from that program, and then we'll talk about how the climate bond is going to help support the expansion of that work. And then, as Kevin said, we'll leave time for questions at the end. So the Division of Land Resource Protection, our primary goal is to support the stewardship of California's natural and working lands with a particular focus on conserving California's irreplaceable agricultural lands. We do this in two ways: by protecting and conserving landscapes, and by supporting the people and organizations who steward those landscapes. In recent decades, California has seen a marked increase in critical resource challenges that threaten the state's watershed health, our agricultural productivity, biodiversity, and human communities, including risks from catastrophic wildfires and groundwater overdraft. Through various watershed resilience programs, our division does aim to support a broad network of partners working to sustain and expand regional leadership to address these challenges. The slide on your screen shows examples of how two of our programs are supporting partnerships in the forest resilience and the groundwater sustainability spaces. Through our regional forest and fire capacity program, which Kevin mentioned, that's the map on the left. The division is funding 13 regional block grantees to build regionally led frameworks for forest and wildfire work across the state. And under this program, regions are empowered to create their own wildfire resilience strategies, as well as coordinate the development of a portfolio of projects to implement those strategies. These grants focus on pre-fire work to reduce severity of fires when they do occur, but also consider post-fire restoration and recovery where relevant. And importantly, they're taking, as I said, a portfolio approach to their work, identifying the strategies that can be implemented across the landscape, projects associated with those strategies, and then developing programs of work based on those projects that can be accomplished across a 5 to 10 year time scale. Working at this scale allows grantees to think more holistically about the impacts of their work at a landscape or watershed level as relevant, um, and really move away from a project by project mentality to addressing an issue that's much bigger than any particular project. And I speak a little bit about this program because this program's approach provided the foundation for the next program that I'll speak about, our Multi-benefit Land Repurposing Program. So the two maps on the right relate to our Multi-benefit Land Repurposing Program, which for brevity's sake, I'll call MLRP. And I'll return to those maps a little later. Before I do, I want to take a step back and provide some context for our work in the groundwater sustainability space, some of which may be familiar to you. So, what problem are we trying to address? I'm going to assume that the majority of folks on this call today are aware of SGMA and its requirements for groundwater sustainability agencies to draft groundwater sustainability plans and to bring the state's groundwater basins back into sustainability by 2040. But if not, feel free to reach out to me and we can have a conversation about that. With that as a foundation, though, we need to acknowledge that while SGMA and groundwater sustainability agencies are focused on ensuring that the state's groundwater basins are brought back to healthy levels, the impacts of addressing these water issues can and will have implications across multiple sectors, including agriculture, the economy, employment, community, local government, air quality, the environment, and more. Public Policy Institute of California anticipates that to bring groundwater levels back into sustainability, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million acres of agricultural land will have to come out of production. And we're seeing that land fallowing happening at an accelerated rate today. Department of Water Resources has multiple programs that are focused on the water side of this issue, but when SGMA was passed, the impacts of this fallowing of hundreds of thousands of acres weren't considered, weren't addressed. So in enters multi-benefit land repurposing. So land repurposing or land transitioning, if you prefer, looks at the need to transition land to less water-intensive uses and considers alternative uses for the land in use of leaving that land fallow. A variety of uses can be considered repurposing, from the creation of multi-benefit recharge areas to the restoration of habitat, planting cover crops or conservation cover, reestablishing tribal land uses, facilitating renewable energy projects, or creating parks or community recreation areas. Any use that reduces the water use on a given site, we would consider as a repurposed land use. As many of those examples show, land repurposing can look like a transition away from agriculture, but it can also include transitioning irrigated agricultural lands to less water-intensive crops or to regenerative ag, dryland farming, or rangeland. Multi-benefit land repurposing takes these strategies a step further and combines two or more of those activities within a single project and site to achieve multiple local, regional, and state objectives. So, for example, a groundwater recharge project that includes habitat restoration and public access. And as I said, I'll provide some specific examples of projects that are approved and moving forward in a little bit. So, with that context, the Multi-benefit Land Repurposing Program was created a few years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago now, to increase regional capacity to repurpose irrigated agricultural land, to reduce reliance on groundwater while providing community health, economic well-being, water supply, habitat, renewable energy, and climate benefits. Do we expect any one project to provide all of those benefits? Certainly not, but we are looking for, again, multi-benefits. Put another way, the program was developed to help regions minimize the negative impacts of transitioning their water-intensive agricultural land to those less intensive uses in a way that not only reduces harms that could result from fallowing lands in an uncoordinated way, but provides those additional benefits to communities that are most likely to be impacted by land fallowing, and in a way that involves communities and diverse interest groups in the conversations about new uses of those lands. The program focuses primarily on areas of the state where groundwater basins are critically overdrafted, but it also covers high and medium priority groundwater basins as well. So what does that look like in practice through the program? So DLRP, Division of Land Resource Protection, provides regional block grants to eligible groups, and we'll get to those eligible groups, to coordinate multiple project activities that result in 6 core deliverables. You see 5 on your screen. That's because outreach and engagement is considered a core deliverable, but it's incorporated in these 5 where relevant. Our block grantees are responsible for coordinating the development of multi-benefit agricultural land repurposing plans. We know that's a mouthful for their region. They're also responsible for funding the development and implementation of land repurposing projects that are in alignment with the goals of those plans that they've developed, conducting outreach and education related to multi-benefit land repurposing, and monitoring the implementation of those land repurposing activities and learning from them. Each block grantee's land repurposing plan should provide a vision and a process for strategically repurposing agricultural lands to meet their region's groundwater sustainability goals while minimizing the harms of reduced groundwater use on local populations and maximizing the benefits. And their plans should identify and prioritize agricultural land repurposing strategies and projects that can be implemented at scale within their region. These plans have to be designed with input from a variety of groups, including agricultural, water, environmental, and local community groups. And the goal here is not to fund a plan that will then be put on a shelf, but to fund a plan that will set the stage for a long-term land repurposing program of work, and to provide grantees with the funding to actually develop and implement an initial set of projects to demonstrate what's possible in their regions through the plan. And I'll touch more on how we hope to expand that vision with the climate bond a little later. Because this work is so new, we also fund an entity that we call the Statewide Support Entity. It's actually a collaboration between a couple of groups. And that statewide support entity helps with a range of activities, from helping our grantees collaborate and share best practices and build a peer-to-peer support network, to ensuring that disadvantaged community engagement within the project work, and working with organizations in regions that don't currently have grants to prepare them for future grant opportunities. On the screen is a visual representation of what a simultaneous approach to our block grant deliverables looks like in existing grants. So grantees can choose whether or not they pursue multiple deliverables either concurrently or sequentially. We provide them with the flexibility to make that decision based on what their regional needs are. The core deliverables that they're required to complete are on the left, while example steps toward reaching those deliverables flow to the right. Um, and while many of these activities occur simultaneously, these deliverables do often feed into each other. So, for example, outreach being conducted to develop the plan can and does raise awareness for around grantees that are looking for multi-benefit land repurposing projects to fund, and projects submitted for implementation that a grantee might not think are ready for immediate funding can instead be funneled into the project development stream of the grant. And then the proponents that are working on those projects um, can build those projects and get them ready for implementation funding. Those proponents may also be nascent partners that could use some capacity support and join the grant work in a more coordinated way. So, who are our eligible block grantees? Eligible applicants include groundwater sustainability agencies, tribes, public agencies, nonprofits, water masters, but where an applicant is not a GSA or a tribe, we require that they partner with at least one GSA. Um, Groundwater sustainability agencies are not required to take the lead on all grants, but they are required to be involved to ensure that accurate accounting of groundwater benefits provided by the land repurposing projects that are pursued occurs, and that the land repurposing work that's being conducted is in alignment with and not in conflict with the relevant groundwater sustainability plans for that region. Some GSAs are well placed to serve as our lead applicant or grantee and coordinate land repurposing efforts in their basin or across a group of subbasins, while others might be best positioned to just manage the water accounting and leave another organization to coordinate the larger land repurposing effort. And our program is structured to accommodate both models. We require partnering and collaboration among stakeholders within regions or basins that we've funded proposals that demonstrate multiple committed partnerships and extensive collaboration with other agencies, organizations, and entities. Um, and while regional, so we require that also that regional block grantees serve in this coordination and facilitation role. But they're also expected to provide funding to their partners to support the work to meet the deliverables of the grant, and they're expected to provide sub-grants for project development and implementation where relevant. However, what that looks like in each region may vary based on the needs and approach of the specific region. So far, the program has awarded 8 block grants, one grant to a tribal organization, and a grant to the statewide support entity. And we've granted about $85 million in funding to date. Not all of that has been expended. The work is still ongoing. Our current grantees cover 8 critically overdrafted basins, if my math is correct, and 2 high priority basins in the San Joaquin, Pajaro, and Salinas valleys. So what is all of this structure working toward and leading to? Um, I'm excited to say that after kind of an initial 2.5 years of planning and project development and project solicitation work, that our grantees are actively submitting implementation projects to move forward. And we've approved 16 implementation projects so far. So as mentioned previously, within their repurposing plans, grantees need to identify a portfolio of land repurposing projects to develop and implement. These projects must cumulatively meet the program's 3 key priorities: conducting repurposing on lands least viable for agriculture, promoting resource connectivity, and providing meaningful benefits to disadvantaged communities. Not every individual project needs to meet all three of these goals. Instead, we're looking at a portfolio approach, similar to as I said in the RFFC program, where the entire suite of projects for each grantee balances these three priorities. Our individual block grantees define what their regions see as least viable agricultural lands and resources connectivity, because that varies across the state. However, the department and our division has provided a definition for projects that provide a meaningful benefit to disadvantaged communities, so that everybody has a consistent definition that they're working with for that priority. This definition was developed through consultation with environmental justice advocates, environmental organizations, and our grantees over many months. And by developing an agreed upon definition for this priority, we've helped to ensure that communities are engaged in the development and selection of implementation projects in a meaningful way. So within that context, we provide a lot of flexibility for the types of projects that we consider eligible for funding for multi-benefit land repurposing projects to meet groundwater sustainability needs. This slide shows a partial list of approved projects in the outer wheel and sample project features pulled from those projects on the inner wheel. Overall, we've taken a menu of options approach that each grantee can tailor, and that individual landowners can tailor to suit their own needs. This has led to grantees combining project features in unique ways that fit the needs for their community. I think I've got about 5 examples here just to give you a flavor for what this is actively looking like on the ground today. In the Kauai subbasin, they're advancing several projects that take traditionally single-purpose recharge basins and layer in multiple additional benefits. At the Flying Dragon Ranch, the landowner proposed to construct a single-person recharge basin, but our MLRP grantee used input from a community advisory committee to negotiate additional project features prior to approving the project for funding and then submitting it to DOC for review and approval. So the basin on this property will now include habitat restoration and public access components. With these added components, the project is anticipated to reduce groundwater demand, increase recharge, reduce flood risks, provide habitat connectivity, and provide recreational access to nearby communities. The Community Advisory Committee's input, combined with MLRP funding and a willing landowner, were all critical in creating a project that will deliver direct and meaningful benefits to nearby disadvantaged communities. Another example, prior to the Multi-benefit Land Repurposing Program's existence, the community of Lavina had been working with Madera County and local growers on community concerns related to air quality from orchards adjacent to the residents. MLRP supported the county to work with the orchard landowner to identify 5 acres of almond and walnuts for conversion to a 100-foot agricultural buffer adjacent to the community. This buffer helps to create distance between the community and orchard activities that cause dust and pesticide use. Additionally, pollinator habitat was planted and will act as a hedgerow that further reduces impacts to the community. MLRP funds are being used for the installation of the hedgerow, as well as an incentive payment to the landowner to remove the trees. And these incentives include credit for air quality and water demand reductions, as well as consideration of foregone income. The bottom picture of this slide shows a community planting day for the hedgerows, which was held after the removal of the orchard trees. Another example, although water scarcity is driving landowners away from permanent agricultural crops, many communities want to maintain working lands and protect their agricultural heritage. And in our division of land resource protection, where agricultural land conservation is a key consideration, we are looking to support them in doing that where it makes sense. So the flexibility of MLRP funding allows communities to envision what continued agricultural production can look like in this uncertain water future. The Nevada Ranch project is an example of this vision. The project will transition 150 acres of irrigated orchard to native grassland and rangeland. Removing the existing orchard will reduce existing groundwater use, while the introduction of rangeland will replace some of the lost revenue. Additional revenue will be generated by the harvest and sale of native grass seeds. And in addition to these uses, the grantee will prepare a study to investigate the feasibility of habitat restoration within the property for use as vernal pool conservation banking. That conservation banking would add a third potential revenue stream and may be compatible with ongoing rangeland activities. Ooh, sorry. Where were we? All right. The flexibility of MLRP also means that block grantees can utilize their funds to fill existing gaps in projects that are already planned. So the Bear Creek Ranch project demonstrates this by using MLRP funds to build off of previous planning activities and take the first steps toward a full project vision. So the Wildlife Conservation Board and Department of Water Resources had previously provided funding to study the suitability of this particular site for long-term floodplain restoration and groundwater recharge. MLRP funds are now being used to begin that process by transitioning the site from irrigated cropland to native grassland and cover cropping. This conversion will result in significant water savings and provides the potential for harvesting and sale of native grass seeds. In addition, similar restoration projects in the area have demonstrated that converting cropland to native grass and cover cropping can help reduce the prevalence of noxious weeds and invasives. Reducing weeds on restoration sites increases the success of later restoration efforts. So the project results in immediate water use benefits and will enable future work on the site. Not sure what number I'm on. I might be on number 5. So the previous examples had focused on implementation projects that are part of larger block grants. In addition to these block grants, the first 2 rounds of multi-benefit land repurposing funding included a set aside for tribal-led grants. While these grants could be block grants, we sought to provide flexibility by allowing tribal organizations to receive funding for more narrowly focused work as well. Unfortunately, the majority of those funds were swept during budget negotiations back in 2024. However, while the funds were available, we were able to make an award to the Dry Creek Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians to support their existing efforts to use floodwaters for managed on-farm recharge in the Russian River watershed. While the Department of Water Resources and Bureau of Indian Affairs are providing the majority of funding for this project, MLRP funding is being used to plug critical gaps in their efforts to plan, permit, and monitor their recharge program. In addition, MLRP is supporting outreach and partnership building efforts to help build and sustain partnerships within the Anderson Valley. Looking ahead to Proposition 4 climate bond funding, we're hoping to again provide this flexibility to tribes to improve our ability to serve those tribal organizations in their water resilience efforts. So what does the future look like for groundwater sustainability? Well, the legislature acknowledged the need for coordinated land repurposing to address the impacts of SGMA across the state, and the value and importance of MLRP in that effort when it included $200 million for multi-benefit land repurposing in the 2024 climate bond. This allocation gives us the opportunity not only to scale up land repurposing work within existing grantees regions, but to expand this work into additional regions over the next decade. Our goal is to expand the program to cover all critically overdrafted and high priority basins interested in receiving funding and doing land repurposing work, with additional coverage in medium priority basins where there's interest. For fiscal year 25-26, we've been appropriated $32 million of the 200 million identified for this purpose in the bond. And we anticipate that additional appropriations will occur over the next few years. We're currently evaluating what revisions might be needed within the program to best support existing grantees scaling up their land repurposing efforts and not duplicating planning efforts, but building on those based on the plans that they're currently developing, while also meeting the needs of regions that have yet to receive land repurposing funding, but are seeing the impacts of agricultural lands being fallowed today. You'll recall that this slide is a visual representation of what a simultaneous approach to our grant deliverables looks like in existing grants. One of the ways that we're considering balancing the needs of this funding in the short term is potentially to provide funding for the program's key deliverables over two phases rather than as just one large block grant. So it would still be a block grant, just a block grant divided into two phases. With the first phase focused on planning priorities, reaching out to communities and developing projects, and then the second phase focused on implementing and monitoring projects. This would allow DOC to initially fund more grantees, both existing and new at smaller initial amounts, with a guarantee that sufficient progress in their grant work would open up an augmentation of that funding as additional climate bond dollars are appropriated by the legislature. However, this approach could make it more difficult for new grantees to demonstrate what multi-benefit land repurposing projects could look like in their communities early on, delaying uptake of land repurposing strategies in those regions. So we're actively seeking input on this proposed approach from existing grantees and interested parties as we actively work on program updates. Our team is in the process of developing guidelines, which will be the vehicle for releasing these climate bond funds. As I said, we're currently consulting with existing grantees, tribal organizations, and other interested parties as we're working on drafting these revisions. And we're also going to solicit additional formal input through a public comment and review period, likely in early 2026. Once the guidelines are finalized, likely in spring to summer of 2026, we'll then move to accepting applications and making grant awards for the initial funding that we have available. And we anticipate that as additional funds are made available by the legislature, that we'll likely accept applications on a rolling basis. If your organization is interested in participating in our program, or if you know an organization that would be a good fit, we'll have multiple opportunities for you to engage with the development of the guidelines, apply for grants, and potentially implement projects. And I would be remiss if I did not note additional funding identified for Department of Conservation programs in the bond, including $180 million for our regional forest and fire capacity work, which I touched on at the top, $140 million for our transformative climate communities, which is helping communities adapt to climate change, $50 million for forest biofuels development, $20 million for farmland access funding, and $15 million for farmland conservation, restoration, and enhancement. And I think I'm about 5 minutes early, but with that, I think I can throw it to Kevin to start with questions.
All right, great. Thanks, Shauna. You're coming through very clearly. So
Excellent.
thanks for hanging in there with your calls.
Yeah.
Let's see. Again, if you have questions, it's not too late to send emails. Um, Send your questions through the emails. The address is on the chat line. Let's see. First off, can you tell us more about what a cover crop is and give some examples?
Ooh, I'm at a higher level, so I let the scientists and the ecologists and whatnot work on what specific examples of cover crops would work in specific areas. But generally speaking, a cover crop is a plant that you intentionally put on the ground in lieu of just leaving the land fallow to reduce the dust related to leaving the land bare in between plantings. Um, a cover crop can be used between seasonal plantings. It can also be used between in orchards, again to reduce that dust.
All right, thank you. Let's see. On the core deliverables and activities slide, program and project monitoring is mentioned.
Yeah.
Can you expand a little more on what that might entail?
Yeah, so it's going to look a little bit different for the different grantees. Our statewide support entity is putting together kind of an overall monitoring best practices approach um, that grantees can rely on across the programs when we're thinking about monitoring. We do require that grantees put in place a monitoring plan to be able to see the impacts of the land repurposing work and ensure that the benefits are maintained for the life of the particular project. So uh for the extent of the grant, for the extent of the grant term, the the regional block grantees can use their monitoring funds to conduct that monitoring work on projects that are implemented during the grant term. They can use that monitoring fund again to develop the monitoring strategy both across their region and then for individual projects based on the outcomes that they're expecting, and to adaptively manage what that looks like, and to put a plan in place for what that monitoring looks like beyond the grant.
All right, great. Let's see. If possible, can you touch a little more on the eligibility requirements for Prop 4? Do you know if universities, CSU and UC are eligible?
Um, I would have to go back and look at the bond language. I don't anticipate that they would be eligible for a regional for a as a block grantee, but I do know that many of our block grantees have sub grants to universities, cooperative extension to support them in aspects of their work. So while we would not expect a university to serve the lead role on a regional block grant, they are certainly eligible to engage with regional block grantees as a sub-grantee and a partner.
All right, thanks. That makes sense. Um, let's see. Is it possible to get on an email list that announces the grant RFPs as they become available?
Absolutely. And if you communicate your contact information with Kevin, he can get that to me and then I can get it to the program team.
Let's see. Regarding additional climate bond funding, can you expand on the types of projects that might be under the $140 million for transformative climate communities?
Oh, yeah. So our Transformative Climate Communities program is a partnership between Department of Conservation and, sorry, guys, and the Strategic Growth Council. And those grants are really innovative grants. They're looking at a um, really locally focused. I think it's like a maximum 5 square mile area. Um, and looking at stacking different project types. Initially, the program was developed out of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund funding, California Climate Investments, and um, working to take communities that historically have been underinvested in and have those communities re-envision or envision kind of what their future looks like. So developing multimodal transportation projects, urban gardens, um, uh, affordable housing, uh, urban greening, just a wide, oh, those are just a few. Agricultural land conservation, creating a comprehensive vision for that 5 square miles. I think that's the correct amount for how they want to transform that, the number of projects and what projects they will implement, and then moving those projects forward over the life of the grant. Um, those also are very heavily partnership based and take significant amount of time to plan, develop, and implement. The Transformative Climate Communities program is actively working on their guidelines updates right now. Um, if they haven't already released them for public comment, but they'll be looking to get that funding out the door. Um, I believe, in the next couple of years as well, dependent on the appropriations from the legislature.
Right. Okay, this is a question on MLRP guidelines. For MLRP funding available for tribes under a future Prop 4 solicitation, does DOC have a process established for consulting tribes on the tribal solicitation guidelines?
The MLRP program does not have its own specific tribal consultation policy, but we do follow the California Natural Resources Agency. They've issued best practices for engaging with tribes for the development of programs, so we will be looking to that. We've also established in one of our land conservation programs a method for doing outreach and engagement to tribes that the MLRP team can lean on and rely on. And the MLRP team has developed an outreach strategy for how they engage with different groups in the development of the guidelines. So, and I can look and get a to get a better sense of that. But um, it is a priority for our division to make sure that when we are developing our guidelines, that we are making sure that tribes' voices are heard in that, and that the guidelines that we're developing for them meet their needs. So we will be sure to share that out and get input before it's finalized.
All right, great. And let's see, I think this is the last question, unless something pops up while I'm reading it and you're answering it. Uh, are there any steps taken to ensure that projects continue to function as repurposed land and achieve restoration objectives in the long term? As a comment, I've participated in discussions regarding CDFW's cutting the green tape effort that supports regulatory permitting for restoration projects. It may be helpful to be aware of this if you're not already, in case any funding Any funded projects need permitting support. And it looks like I have maybe a link to cutting the green tape.
Yeah, so can you read the first part? Because it sounded like
Yes.
there was a question related to kind
All
of long-term monitoring, but then separate from that perhaps is the like actually getting the projects implemented. So I just
right.
want to make sure I'm
Sure.
understanding.
So are there any steps taken to ensure that projects continue to function as repurposed land and achieve restoration objectives in the long term?
Yeah. So, all of our grantees are required for each project to identify what outcomes they are looking for on any land repurposing project, and based on the outcomes that they're looking to achieve, develop a monitoring plan and process to track those outcomes. And then in terms of ensuring that the land repurposing is maintained, separate from just the monitoring piece of it, the time scale varies from project to project. Some might be, cover cropping on an annual basis to uh, decrease the amount of transitional water used, right? That's an annual time scale. The monitoring there is going to be at an annual time scale, right? And the impacts are not going to necessarily extend beyond that. We have some land repurposing projects that might have a 10-year time scale, and we have others where the grantees are working to ensure that that repurposed use is maintained into perpetuity. And they're looking at, so they're looking at different land restriction mechanisms to ensure those uses are maintained for that whatever length of time they're looking at. So using a conservation easement if they're looking at making sure that land use is maintained in perpetuity and incorporating within that easement the restrictions that ensure that that land use is maintained. Or if they're not looking at perpetuity, but they want 20 or 30 years, looking at a temporary deed restriction or contract or lease term. What there are multiple mechanisms that might work depending on the unique situation of a given project to make sure that that repurposed use is maintained for the time that the landowner commits to.
Okay, great. Give me a second here. I have another question that came in. Okay, let's see. You mentioned outreach strategies for various groups. Do you have an outreach strategy for small scale farmers? And then I can reread the question, but let me finish what's said here. We are especially concerned about small scale farmers in the white areas with no access to surface water. I work with Community Alliance with family farmers, helping small scale farmers get involved in Sigma implementation. And many of them in the San Joaquin Valley think that MLRP doesn't have much to offer small scale farmers.
Yeah, that is great. Excuse me. Great feedback. Much appreciated. I think that that is a gap that I have heard expressed more frequently recently. And so that's certainly something that we are um, interested in exploring. What the solution is to that, I will require engagement with those small scale farmers to see whether or not MLRP is the venue for that, or whether or not there are alternative pathways. Um, I will say I have not, it's been a minute since I've looked at the team's outreach strategy. So whether or not small scale farmers are listed specifically there, I can't say one way or another. But I certainly can circle back with the team to make sure that that is on their list of communities to engage with, um, for sure.
All right, I'm looking at my inbox and I don't see any more questions. So, Shauna, thanks so much for answering all the questions and thanks so much for giving the presentation. So really on behalf of OWP and all of today's participants, we want to thank you again for volunteering your time and giving a great presentation. And I also want to thank all our listeners, and I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving week. Take care.
Yeah.